All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hi to everybody that's new to our podcast. We are a podcast named Men Redefining Manhood. So, welcome. Welcome to Men Redefining Manhood, a podcast and movement for fathers and men ready to rewrite what it means to be men. This isn't about perfection, it's about presence, it's about healing, not hiding. It's about building men up, not tearing each other down. Let's redefine manhood together. Last week, we got into the topic of vulnerability um, when it comes to men being scared, being intimidated, to be vulnerable. This week's topic, we're going to discuss um, leadership in the home, what it is to guide as a father and guide as a man. Um, when I think of leadership, um, I think of my role as a father, what I can do to teach my children, and I guess what a proper dad should look like, what a proper man should look like, what a proper husband should look like, um, by kind of going off looking at some of the mistakes maybe that I've seen my father do and kind of picking and choosing some of the stuff that I seen he did well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's what I
Mm.
think of when I think of leadership and leading as a father and as a husband, as a man, just in
As a
general.
family man, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think leadership is interesting because right, everybody's going to have a different definition of what leadership is, depending on what their upbringing and their life experience has been. Right.
Hmm.
For some people, the leadership experience that we have is going to be very different to what they're having. But I think being able to share that, with your spouse, your partner, and also being able to look at your role as a leader in a way where it's offered in a balanced way so that we don't have these high expectations of our children because we're expecting them to take the forefront and be leaders, but in that same process, putting a tremendous amount of pressure on them that maybe in the moment they may not be ready to take on.
Hmm.
Um, and I think for me that comes from in the Latino families. What you have is there's a it's almost like a fear tactic. And fathers will say, um, cuida tu mamá, take care of your mom, because if I'm not here, you're the man of the house,
Hmm.
right? And right from that beginning, right from that moment, right, that pressure starts to build on taking that role of being the leader in the home in the absence of your parent, and that it doesn't stop. There's always
Hmm.
this constant movement of, right, making sure that you're performing to your optimal level.
Yeah. Well, what also comes to mind, because again, when I think leadership, when I think of being the man of the house, um, I kind of reflect back on my upbringing, and I looked at it as my father. He worked a lot. He was a construction worker, so his role and his leadership was just kind of defined on providing for the family. There was never really an emotional attachment between me and him until we got older and we had some conversations, which we still kind of work on. But that's something that when I became a parent myself, I caught myself doing, like, in my early stages of my
Mm-hmm.
relationship. I really didn't want my wife to kind of work. I had two jobs. I worked a lot. I worked about 16, 17, sometimes 18 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
to just be a provider, and not really look at the role of being emotionally there for my family, being there actually for my son. Because one of the things that I did tell my wife when we first met, I wanted to be a young dad because I wanted to spend time with my kid, and I did the complete opposite in the early stages of my uh, adulthood, my fatherhood. So one of the things that I prided myself on is working on doing what my father didn't know how to do and lack of, and being there emotionally for my son. I remember when he first started sports, and that could bring a whole disarray of emotions. Not feeling enough, not you know, uh,
Constantly
constantly,
pushing.
yeah, constantly pushing. So one of the things I was like, no, I want to be there to support him and know that I'm here. This is something that he wants to do, and I'll be it. And you know, I fast forward and look at now, and we've had some interesting conversations, me and my son, in regards to like his emotional state, how he feels. He's in college right now, so
Mhm.
we have some interesting conversations on what he's doing, and more emotional stuff. Um, and I pride myself in that. I'm like, okay, I'm not just that provider. I'm also, you know, talking to him about his emotions, but also working on my emotions too. Speaking with my wife of how I feel about certain things, and I talk about this a lot at work, having that balance and understanding that relationships are sometimes your partner has to be the 80% and you can only give 20 at the time frame. Um,
Fluctuates, yeah.
yeah, and before my mind frame was never there. My mind frame was I gotta be the provider. I gotta take care of this. If I have to work 20 hours a day to make sure everything is cool financially and provide, then that's what my role as a leader. That's what my role as a man, husband, father is. And
Yeah.
now my thought is totally different.
Yeah, by
And
the time you get home, you're emotionally spent, and then
yeah,
you don't have
yeah,
anything to offer.
yeah.
Which is interesting you mentioned that, because if we notice, right, effective leaders create change through the transfer of emotion,
Mhm.
right? When we hear a speech from influential people, may it be presidents, may it be political activists, etc., right? Human rights activists, whatever it is, right? Their speeches and the way they say them carry emotion, and that is what makes you motivated to move, right?
Mhm.
So we as fathers, wanting to be leaders, we can't just be leaders without the emotion part of it,
Mhm.
right? Like, we can't go to work and just go to work and pour it all into work to be able to provide, but then expect to create change and motivation and closeness in our families when the emotional part of it is completely absent,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, yeah, leadership is important. But I don't know. Tell me what you think. I think taking a leadership role is important, but I think that what's also extremely important is to be able to have the confidence as a man to share that leadership role with your spouse,
Yeah.
right?
And that's something that was very difficult for me because being in a Hispanic culture, being in a predominant, very machista role, where I seen my father, he was the one like, it's my way.
Or the highway.
Lo que yo digo manda. Like no, and I did that in the early stages of my marriage, and it affected a lot, and it
Sure.
caused a lot of conflict. And in my early stages, I got humbled, where I was out of work and dealing with that situation where I was doing more, I guess, predominantly, I don't want to say predominantly, I guess, the woman's duty of cleaning and stuff like that, which is no. And going through that was very humbling and made me think a lot different. Like, wow, okay, like, dang, this role is a lot. Like,
It's a
not
lot of
only
work.
that, this shouldn't just be one person type thing,
Sure.
Um, but seeing that was very humbling and very,
Mhm.
it made me think different. It made me look at it a lot differently. And it's like, no, like, and seeing how supportive my wife was towards it too. Like, no, it's okay. Like, I got this. Like, sometimes we're like I said earlier, sometimes I have to be the 80%. You have to be the 20%. Like, fix what you got to fix, and we'll make it work. And now it's like we talk about that. Like, hey, how's your day? Like, is there anything I can do for you?
Hmm.
Like, being in that sense of looking at leadership a lot differently, on wanting to provide and help, was kind of hard for me. But now that I see it, it's been amazing in all aspects. Watching the growth in my child, watching the improvement in my relationship,
Hmm.
um, and just seeing how differently it affected everything by just being, going back into it, being vulnerable, and allowing myself to be okay with her to take part of that leadership and understand that we're one. You know, um, we're in a relationship, and I remember my dad always talking about it. Cuando se casan son uno, but it was never really shown to me.
Right, right.
So learning that was difficult, but it's been beautiful watching how much we have grown, balancing ourselves in the leadership role.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've always had this in mind, and I share this with people. That if you have a pallet of bricks, and symbolically speaking, the pallet of bricks represents all the responsibilities that are in a household, and the responsibilities that you carry as a husband, as a wife, as a parent, right? It's definitely easier to carry that pallet of bricks by two than it is by one.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
who said it? I think Chris Rock said something like that recently. I seen a social media thing that he posted. He's like, "Yeah, relationships. You got to think of relationships like a moving buddy. Lifting a couch by yourself and trying to move it, it's
eh,
difficult as shit, right?
yeah,
But if you were to have two people moving that couch, it's going to be a lot
a
easier.
lot
So the
easier.
relationship, you gotta, there has to be a huge balance between it.
Absolutely.
Sometimes somebody has to take the heavier side of that load, and somebody
Hmm.
has to take the lighter side because they're not,
Although
emotionally all
sometimes some
there.
people want to choose the lighter side of
Yeah,
it, right?
right.
It's like, well, I mean, you compensate for each other,
Yeah.
in moments when it's needed, right? That's what teamwork is about. And, leadership is important because, again, if effective leaders, they create change and they motivate, right? Through the use of emotion. But at the same time, effective leaders allow for participation, right?
Yeah.
In other words, when you look at, for example, you know um, major corporation CEOs, everything that's been built hasn't been built by them themselves, right? Everything that's been built has been built by a team of people
Hmm.
that they've been okay with allowing that process to take place, right?
Yeah.
And so at home it's the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like, what, don't try to build this castle by yourself when there's other people there that are very valuable, and
Hmm.
being part of that process, right? And allowing and sharing that leadership, right? Allowing your spouse to be a leader and to have a valuable say so into and opinions and decision making in everything that happens, as well as incorporating your children into it, right? Letting them have a voice. And now, granted, with children to a certain extent as well, right? Like, there's got to be some boundaries because children are still children,
Hmm.
and they're not going to, you know they may not have the knowledge or the experience to be able to make, some very important decision. But you can always ask for input, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, when it comes to sharing that space, with your spouse, by far, right, there's nothing wrong with sharing that leadership role and allowing your spouse to take the initiative, and to go with what is right for the family,
Yeah.
and vice versa, right? Sharing that over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I catch myself trying to do it more often, like on both sides. Like, my son, he's always like, he's in college, but I mean, we have a group chat between me and my wife and him, and he's always asking like, "Hey, what is your guys' opinion on that?" And like, I feel so good about it because we've given the opportunity to have that voice and have that opinion and have like, hey, what do you guys think? And sometimes, like recently, I told him, I'm like, Ruben, you're an adult, man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, but I value. He texted us that recently. He's like, I value you guys' opinion. Like, I want to know, like, you've helped me this much so far, Dad, and everything's been going good. So I want to continue that. And I'm like, but at some point, son, you have to be okay with your decisions as well. But I said, but don't think that I'm not. I'm here. I will be here till the day I get put in the ground, and I will always be here for you to, bounce any kind of opinions or thoughts towards me. And that's something that I've prided myself on, being there emotionally for him, being there to guide him, and like prior to this, I was at the barber, and my barber asked me because he has a pretty good relationship. We have a pretty good relationship. Ruben gets his haircut there, and he was asking me. He's like, because we're talking about Ruben being in college, and he's like, "Do you how do you feel like I'm a younger parent, so I'm trying to understand like how do you feel like you feel like you've done enough? Do you feel like seeing that Ruben's in college and seeing everything that he's doing, do you feel that you've done enough?" And I'm like, I think so, man. I think I've gotten to the point where I've seen him flourish in what he's doing. Like he pushes himself to an extent and he's doing what he has to do. And I feel like it's a lot of the conversations that I've had with him, my wife's had with him, and not like that, like us having a team around him, like I was telling him, a lot of it comes from my wife's side of the family that had pushed him as well. Like, hey, do this, try that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, wow, watching that growth. And I really sat back and I'm like, when he asked me that, I'm like, dang, yeah, like that leadership, that guidance has helped him a lot. Like I see it flourish so much in what he's doing now. And it's like, wow,
Yeah.
okay. I'm like, cool. Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel a sense of pride about it. Like,
Of
okay,
course.
like,
Well, if you think about it, right? Like again, another critical, trait that leaders have is that there's a difference between a manager, a supervisor, and a leader,
mhm,
right? Managers manage, supervisors observe, they supervise, right? But leaders guide, instill confidence, teach, right? And they're involved in the process,
mhm,
right? Like they're not just like, hey, do that, leaders show by example,
mhm,
right? They get in there, they do the dirty work too, and in the process, they teach those around them, and they allow for, hey, why don't you try it? Why don't you go ahead, take charge,
yeah,
let's get it done, right? Let's see, how do we do this, right? And so when you cross compare that to being a leader in a family, whether it's yourself or your spouse or your partner, that's what happens, right? Like being okay and being vulnerable in leading means at times being able to step away for the sake of giving somebody else the opportunity to take charge and build the confidence that's going to help them when they step out of home, right? In this
yeah,
case, our kids, right?
yeah,
When they step out, they're going to feel that confident being able to make those decisions or being able to reach out, and and it goes a long way. It
yeah,
really does go a long way. Which, by the way, probably something that, in hearing you speak about your relationship with your dad and my personal experience with my dad, right, to a certain extent, maybe it existed, but in only specific areas, not in a well-rounded experience.
mhm,
Where dad goes to work, brings the money home, provides, and so forth, and offers initiative and leadership in that space, right?
mhm,
But then in other areas, it's like, okay, where is it, right?
yeah.
Being able to guide your
Yeah,
children, being able to talk, being able to offer advice, or being able to, let them take the reins, so to speak, and guide them as they go. Like that. It's a different process. It's
yeah.
So yeah, yeah, it's you know, as it's interesting because we don't see it, right? Like we might not see it because it's a day-to-day thing and we have this sense of obligation to fulfill within our family systems, that it's like, oh, but when you really break it down, right? Like, yeah, you're taking on a leadership role to have your family system experience forward progress, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that means making certain decisions, doing things that maybe you might not be accustomed to doing, because that's not the way you're brought up.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me, like I said, I was so accustomed to watching my father only be a provider, and doing that in the early stages of my adulthood as a father. I was like, no. I remember what it felt like not having anybody to speak to and struggle. And also, I guess going through therapy myself and going through my own healing process of all my childhood trauma and stuff that I have worked through, it made me realize, like, no, I want to do something different. I need to be the voice there, because there was only so much expectations that my dad gave, like, you
Mm.
know do this, do that, but he never really did anything to try to help me understand that. And I was like, no, this is an area that, and we've had that conversation, me and him. Like, I told him, I'm grateful for everything that you've done, Dad, but you've also taught me what not to do as a father.
Mm.
There's a lot of areas that I took from you that I pride myself on, like being the hardest worker in the room, being, trying to be a provider and stuff like that. But there's also these areas that you didn't give me, that I
Mm.
want to give my family, that I want to do. I need to give my son. So when he becomes a father himself, then that generation gets changed. And I feel it, back to my barber too. Like, we've had that conversation on the generational breaking of things, because a lot of stuff we talk about. Me and him have a lot of similar.
Which is actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's the next topic we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah,
The breaking generational
yeah,
patterns and cycles, right?
yeah,
So yeah. Anyway, yeah.
yeah, and that's something that we have talked about, and looking at it, like, dang, like, okay, let's continue that path. And I go back to thinking the question that he asked me, like, do you feel like you've done enough? I'm like, yeah, I told my son I don't want, I sit back and I always remember telling my son this, and I always tell him, I don't want you to be nothing like me. I want you to do better. I want you to break these expectations. I want you to do something different. But I know that I also see a lot of him in me, with sometimes the stubbornness, but also the hard working part that I've
Mm-hmm.
instilled in him, and my wife has instilled in him,
Mm-hmm.
going to school and doing what we've done.
Sure.
And I see that. I'm like, wow, okay, like, dang. I'm starting to see the fruits of that labor. And I'm like, wow, okay. And it makes me think, and it makes me see, like, what our next topic is going to get into. The breaking of generational curses is really happening. And I pride myself in that. And I'm like, okay, we've done something new.
Mm-hmm.
We've changed the process. We've changed what the future looks like for my future family.
Absolutely. And it's easy to remain on the same pattern, right?
Yeah,
Because you don't have to reinvent the wheel,
yeah,
right? You just continue on with what you've learned, and what they've taught you, and you pass it on, right?
yeah,
But it takes courage, and it's a lot more difficult to begin to initiate a completely different behavior pattern, um, family restructuring or structure, because now you have to incorporate some things that even you yourself are not very familiar with, but you know that they're important,
Mhm.
and you're going for it, and you're hoping, right? Like, what, I know this is the right thing. This is what's going to help my family move away from what I've experienced growing up.
Mhm.
But how do we do this?
Mhm.
Right? How do I do this? Right? And so again, there's that vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And the willing to take risks, which is also another trait of being an effective leader, right?
Yeah.
Being able to take calculated risks and working at it to make sure that you get the best out of it. So, yeah, yeah. So for the next podcast, we'll be talking about breaking the generational patterns, generational cycles, right? And
Mhm.
maybe offering like obviously our experience about what that looked like, and what are some things that we've done to break those.
Yeah.
Think would be cool.
It's a scary one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I seen something. I read something the other day, and it said the breaking of generational curses can be very hard for a lot of people, because, especially for families, because ultimately you're killing off the old version of you,
Yeah.
and some family members can't take that.
Yeah. And there's a sense of loyalty that goes, right?
Yeah. So it can
It's
be
like,
very difficult, and especially in our Hispanic culture,
yeah,
it's very, very difficult. And for me, it's a big struggle, and it's something still that I'm struggling today with my family. Not truly understanding it, but kind of seeing a little bit of the fruits of that labor, especially with my son now.
hmm
Because I've had some conversations with my dad, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's scary.
yeah,
But I find it very beneficial to my own mental health, and not only that, seeing my son flourish, and seeing the pride that my wife has watching where our kid is at.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
it'll be a
absolutely.
great topic. I look forward to speaking about it, and you know getting other people's opinion on it, hopefully soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully this podcast offered you some great insight, into you know um, leadership within the family system. The role of you as a leader, and what that may be, maybe what you think it looks like, or what it should look like, and to be okay to be able to share that. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, for the next podcast, stay tuned. We will be talking about breaking those generational patterns and behaviors, and taking that calculated risk and being courageous enough to incorporate new strategies and ways of doing thing and thinking uh, within your family, for the sake of making healthy adjustments for the generations to come. We will see you guys then.
All
Right?
right.
Go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing you guys, and please check out our other videos. And yeah, hopefully you guys gain some insight from what we're trying to provide. Thank you again, and yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Have
All
a
right.
good day, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye.